A cold autumn rain beats down on the asphalt. It pours down like a wall, without ceasing. Water flows down the streets in streams. Streetlights shine through the watery haze as blurry yellow spots. People shelter under umbrellas and run to their apartment building entrances. The city noise is drowned out by the sound of falling water. The air smells of wet concrete and rotting leaves. Evening comes quickly and damply. Asia stands under the narrow canopy of a flower shop. The shop is closed. She holds her school backpack in front of her, trying to protect herself from the splashes. She looks at the rain and thinks about her mother. Her mother is worried. Dinner is ready at home. Asia is tired. Her feet were wet this morning. Now they are freezing. She decides to run. She takes a deep breath, prepares to break into a run, but her gaze catches movement on the other side of the street. She stops. A black car is parked opposite. Next to the car is a man. He's not hiding from the rain. He stands motionless, facing the park. He's wearing a long gray coat. The collar is up. Water drips from his short black hair onto his face. He stares into space and doesn't move. Asia freezes. Her heart beats faster. She knows this face. She has seen it hundreds of times, but not in life. In a photograph. In that very photograph from her mother's jewelry box. A photograph of her father. A father who is no longer alive. She slowly retreats deeper under the awning. Her eyes are wide open. She can't look away. She compares. Facial features, straight nose, firm chin. Posture, straight back, slumped shoulders. Coat, long, gray, double-breasted. The same as in the photograph. Coincidence? She peers closer. The resemblance is unnerving. She thinks, this is impossible. She's tired. Her eyes are failing her. It's just a similar man. There are many coats like this, but her instincts scream for something else. She looks again. The man turns his head. His gaze slides down the street. He doesn't notice her. He looks through the rain. Asia presses her back against the cold display case. Her hands are shaking. She can't just leave. She has to understand. But how? Approach? Ask? Fear paralyzes her. She sees the man finally move. He turns to the car. The door opens from the inside. Now he'll get in and drive away. Disappear. She loses him forever. Asia remembered a tiny detail. In an old photograph, her father had a barely noticeable mole above his left eyebrow. She always touched it with her finger. The girl peered through the rain. On the man's face, in the same spot, was a small dark spot. Asia's heart sank. This couldn't be a coincidence. She looked at his hands. He pulled the keys out of his pocket. Wide palms, long fingers, just like the man in the photograph who had his arm around her mother's shoulders. Asia felt a slight dizziness. She gripped her backpack tighter. Calm down, she told herself. It wasn't him. Dad died. Mom said so. She tried to spot the differences. The man looked older than her father in the photo, but the photo was old. If her father had lived, he would have looked just like this. His clothes? The coat seemed an exact copy, but maybe it was just a popular style? Her thoughts were jumbled. Fatigue, stress from the test, heavy rain. All of this could affect her perception. She wanted to believe it was a stranger. It was easier and safer that way. But another part of her insisted, what if Mom was wrong? Or lying? Asia immediately pushed the thought away. No, Mom hadn't lied. She'd seen her tears. She'd cried over that box herself, but the resemblance didn't disappear. The longer she looked, the more convinced she became. This wasn't a trick of the light. Before her stood a living man, a replica of her dead father. This violated every law of her world. She was afraid to approach him, even more afraid to leave and never know the truth. The man sighed, as if awakening from his thoughts. He reached for the car door handle. The door was already slightly open. Now he would get in, and the car would move off. He would disappear into the stream of traffic and rain, forever. Asia realized she couldn't live with this forever. Doubts would eat her up. She imagined looking at the photograph over and over again, searching for refutations and confirmations. It would become an obsession. Instinct overcame fear. Her legs carried her forward, straight into the wall of rain. She didn't think about cars or rules. She ran across the street without looking either way. Water lashed her face, stinging her eyes. She reached the car just as the man, Jinho, was leaning over to get in. She touched his sleeve. The material of the coat was thick and wet. Sorry, she cried, her voice shaking. Jinho turned around. His gaze was empty and tired. He stared right through her, still lost in his thoughts. He simply waited for her to stop bothering him, and then Asia blurted it out. The words came out on their own, without her even realizing it. You look like my father, the one who's gone. She fell silent, gasping for breath. Water from her hair ran down her cheeks. She looked at him, afraid of his reaction, afraid he would get angry, afraid he would turn away indifferently. But most of all, she was afraid he would confirm her wild guess. The words sounded loud and awkward. Asia realized it immediately. They hung in the wet air. She stood under the streams of rain, rain and looked at the man. Water poured into her eyes. She couldn't tell if she was crying or just the rain. She said it. She forced it out. He looks like his father. Now he was looking at her. His face was close. She saw every detail, the very same details from the photograph. It made it even more terrifying. Asia waited. She waited for him to say, "Move away," or what? Maybe he'd just remain silent. Maybe his driver would get out and push her away. She braced herself for anything, but he did nothing. He simply stared, and there was no anger in his gaze. There was an empty space there, as if he was looking through her at something else. Jinho heard a voice, a child's voice. He turned toward the sound. A drenched girl stood before him. She said something. His mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about supply problems. He was thinking about the call he needed to make. The rain was a nuisance. This girl was another nuisance. He nodded, automatically, politely. He didn't even hear the words. He saw her lips moving. He heard sounds, but the meaning didn't sink in. He had already started to turn back to the car. He had to go. He didn't have time for random passers-by. His hand reached for the door handle again. He stepped into the warmth and dryness of the car. The girl was simply part of the noisy, wet evening. Another irritant. Nothing more, nothing less. And suddenly, his legs froze. His brain, belatedly, reproduced the phrase, word by word. Looks like my father, who is gone. At first, it was just a jumble of words. Then they came together. Then the meaning hit with all its force. He slowly straightened up, stepped away from the car, turned to face the girl. The rain poured down on him, but he didn't notice. He peered at her. For the first time, he truly saw her, a girl, about 10 years old, dark-skinned, large, frightened eyes. She was shaking from cold and excitement, and she just said he looks like her dead father. His world stopped for a second. All plans, all thoughts disappeared. Only this girl and her wild words remained. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know what to say. This had never happened in his life before. He stood there, silent. He looked at her. His face was expressionless. Inside, there was complete chaos. He tried to find logic, to find an explanation. He found nothing. The driver in the car coughed uneasily. Jinho didn't react. He was in a stupor, complete and utter. The silence lasted for a few seconds. It was interrupted by the sound of rain and the distant honk of a car. Jinho slowly caught his breath. He felt cold water seeping under the collar of his coat. It brought him back to reality. He had to say something, do something. The girl waited, staring at him wide-eyed. He took a step forward to close the distance. Now they stood very close under the streams of water. "I'm sorry." His voice was quiet but clear. "Please repeat it. What did you say?" He asked the question politely, almost formally, but his eyes were attentive. The haze of distraction vanished. He looked at her, waiting for an answer, studying her face. Asia shuddered at his voice. He spoke, not rudely. He asked her to repeat. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I said that you look like my dad." She wiped her wet face with her hand, trying to see him better. "In the photograph, we have a photograph of him at home, and he was wearing the same coat. Exactly." She pointed at his coat, at the wide lapels, at the large buttons. Her voice trembled, but her words were clear. The same gray, the same long, and the same buttons. She looked him straight in the eyes. "Mom said he was gone, but you're like him, alive." She fell silent, afraid she'd said too much, but it was true. This detail, the coat, seemed the most important piece of evidence to her. A face could be mistaken, but not such strange, distinctive clothing. Jinho listened in silence. His gaze slid down his coat, then back to the girl's face. He didn't remember anyone else having a coat like that. It had been custom-made several years ago. The coincidence seemed impossible, but that wasn't the point now. He looked at her again. She was alone, soaking wet. It was getting dark outside. The downpour continued. Leaving the child in this state was out of the question, no matter what she said. His brain, accustomed to quickly assessing the situation and making decisions, switched gears. Was the girl potentially dangerous? No. Did she need help? Yes. Could he provide it? Yes. He nodded, more to himself than to her. "You need to go home," he said firmly. His tone became businesslike, devoid of emotion. "You can't sit here alone in this weather." He opened the car door wider and gestured inside. "Get in. I'll give you a ride. Give me the address." He looked at her, making it clear it wasn't a request, but a reasonable offer. "Otherwise, you'll catch a cold. Your mother will worry even more." Asia hesitated for a second. She looked at the warm, dry interior, at the dark street, at his serious face. Fear told her not to get into a stranger's car, but her own frozen body and the burning desire to know the truth were stronger. She nodded. "Okay," she said quietly. Jinho let her go first. She climbed in, leaving wet footprints on the seat. He climbed in after her and closed the door. The sound of the rain became muffled. The interior smelled of leather and cleanliness. "Address?" he asked, turning to the driver, who was already looking in the rearview mirror, awaiting the command. Asia whispered the street and house number. The car pulled away smoothly, cutting through the streams of water. Jinho stared straight ahead, sensing the quiet, wet embodiment of some old, long-forgotten secret sitting beside him. The car drove smoothly and almost silently. The sound of the rain faded to a dull rustle behind the tinted windows. The cabin was warm. The air was dry. Asia sat pressed against the door. Her wet jacket left a dark stain on the light leather of the seat. She looked out the window at the blurry lights floating past, but saw nothing. Her thoughts revolved around the man sitting half a meter away. She stole a glance at his reflection in the glass. He sat upright, staring straight ahead. His face was calm and inscrutable. He didn't look at her. It seemed he'd forgotten she existed. She thought about the coat, about the photograph. She tried to compare the image in her memory with the person next to her. Doubts returned. Maybe she had exaggerated? Maybe it was just an incredibly strong resemblance? But then where did she get that same coat? She clenched her fists. The question she was afraid to ask out loud echoed in her head. "Who are you?" Jinho was silent too. His gaze was fixed on the space between the seats, but his thoughts were racing. The girl, the photograph, the coat. The coincidence was too incredible. He remembered an old coat he'd worn 7 years ago. It truly was unique. He'd never seen anyone else like it. Why had the girl approached him? A simple coincidence? Or something else? He analyzed her behavior. Genuine fear, sincere anxiety. She didn't look like a fraud. She looked lost. His brain, accustomed to seeing a catch and calculation in every action, didn't find it here. This bothered him more than anything. Asia said quietly. The car stopped at this curb in front of a 5-story brick building. The house was old but well-maintained. Lights were on in several windows. Jinho glanced at the entrance. Nothing special. A typical residential area. He nodded to the driver, signaling him to wait. Asia reached for the door handle, but then froze. She turned and looked at him. "Thanks for the ride," she muttered. "You're welcome," he replied, his voice neutral. "Go quickly. You'll freeze." He got out of the car, too. He hadn't planned it, but something compelled him to do it. Perhaps a sense of duty to see the child to the door, perhaps a strange, inexplicable desire to see where she would go, or the question that still hung in the air between them. They walked a few steps to the entrance. The rain was still pouring, but here, under the small overhang, it was a little drier. Asia took out her key, but didn't open the door herself. Instead, she knocked on the dark green door of apartment number 7. The knock rang out loudly in the quiet entryway. Asia stood with her head down, clutching her wet backpack. She was afraid to turn around. Jinho stood 2 steps behind her, in the shadow cast by the stairwell. He didn't want to startle whoever opened the door. He simply waited. His figure in a long dark coat looked alien and slightly ominous in this narrow space illuminated by a yellow bulb. He heard another door slam somewhere above. The house was silent. He stared at the door that held this girl's life. A life that, she said, held a photograph of a man who looked just like him. He didn't know what to expect. He'd braced himself for a tired woman to open the door, thank him, and then close the door, and that would be the end of it. For some reason, this thought left him slightly disappointed. Footsteps were heard outside the door. Light, quick. The click of the bolt. The door opened. The door opened quickly, as if someone had been standing behind it, waiting. A woman appeared on the threshold. It was Taya. She looked tired, but her face immediately lit up with relief when she saw Asia. The woman wore simple lounge pants and a sweater, her hair pulled back into a loose ponytail. "Asia! Oh my God, I was so worried!" Her voice was full of concern and anxiety. She immediately reached out to hug her daughter. "You're soaking wet! Where have you been?" At that moment, her gaze slid behind her daughter. She saw a man. The smile froze on Taya's face. Her eyes, so warm and soft just a moment ago, widened. At first, they were filled with confusion. Who was this man? Why was he standing behind her daughter? Then her gaze focused. She looked at his face, at his features, at the high cheekbones, the straight nose, the shape of his eyes. She looked at his coat, long, gray, double-breasted. Time stood still. Taya stopped breathing. The color instantly drained from her face. Her skin turned ashen gray. Her eyes, still wide open, were filled not with horror, but with something deeper, a pure animal shock, as if she had seen not a person, but a ghost from her worst nightmare. Her lips trembled. She tried to say something, but no sound came out, only a quiet, hoarse exhalation. She recognized him. Immediately, without a shadow of a doubt. Years had passed, but she recognized every feature. It was Jinho. Her legs suddenly felt like jelly. She felt the floor give way beneath her. She took a step back, unsteadily, trying to hold on to the doorframe. Her hand gripped the doorknob, her fingers white with the strain. "Mom?" Aisha turned around, startled by her mother's expression. She didn't understand. "Mom, what's wrong?" But Taya no longer heard her. She looked only at Jinho, her world, which she had so carefully constructed all these years. A world where there was only her and Aja, a world where the girl's father was dead, collapsed in an instant. Then he resigned himself to it. He opened his mouth to say something, at least to say her name, but he didn't have time. Taya's eyes rolled back in her head. Her consciousness, overwhelmed by shock, shut down to protect her. Her fingers loosened, releasing the doorknob. She began to fall backwards into the hallway, as if mown down. "Mother!" Eiji's scream sounded piercing and frightened. Jinho reacted instantly, automatically. He stepped forward, across the threshold, catching Tai's falling body before it hit the floor. He held her, feeling her hanging limply in his arms. She was light, fragile. Asia was rushing around, her eyes full of tears. Mom, what's wrong with you? Wake up! Jinho quickly assessed the situation. He carefully carried Taya further into the hallway and laid her on the floor, away from the threshold. He crouched down next to her, checking her breathing and pulse. She was breathing. Her heart was beating rapidly but steadily. She had simply fainted from shock. "She's okay," he told Aya, and his voice, to his own surprise, sounded calm and reassuring. "It's shock. She just fainted. Help me. I need to raise her legs." Asia nodded tremblingly and rushed to find something to put under her mother's feet. The small, cozy hallway was now in chaos. A woman Jinho hadn't seen in years lay on the floor. Their daughter was crying nearby. And he, a man accustomed to being in control of any situation, sat kneeling on someone else's floor, aware that his past had just burst into the present with deafening force. For a few seconds, a quiet panic reigned in the small hallway. Jinho held Tai's limp body, while Ija thrashed about. "A pillow! Or roll up your jacket," Jinho told the girl clearly, cutting off her tears with a commanding tone. Asia rushed into the room and returned with a small throw pillow from the sofa. Jinho carefully lifted Tai's legs and placed the pillow under her ankles to improve blood flow to her head. His movements were confident and quick, like those of someone familiar with basic first aid. "Open the kitchen window. Let some air in," he continued. Asia rushed to do the job. She heard him speak calmly and deliberately to her mother, even though she was unconscious. "Breathe, it's okay. You're safe." His voice sounded like an anchor in the chaos. Asia returned, breathing heavily. She fell to her knees next to her mother, stroking her hand. "Mom, please wake up." After a minute that felt like an eternity, Taya's eyelids fluttered. She groaned softly. Consciousness returned slowly, through the depths of shock. "Mom!" Asia almost screamed with relief. Jinho motioned for the girl to be quiet. He continued to squat nearby, watching closely. Taya slowly opened her eyes. At first, she didn't understand anything. Then she saw the ceiling, the familiar chandelier. Then she saw her daughter's tear-filled face leaning over her. And only then did her gaze, still clouded, find the man sitting next to her. Memory and awareness struck with renewed force. She tried to push herself up on her elbows, but weakness and dizziness pressed her to the floor again. "Lie still," Jinho said. His voice was even, but there was no warmth in it. It was a statement of fact. "You fainted. You're okay." He helped her sit up slowly, leaning her back against the wall in the hallway. His hand on her shoulder was firm and impersonal, simply a functional support. Taya recoiled from his touch as if from fire. She was pale as a sheet, her hands trembling. "Mom, how are you? What happened?" Aisha hugged her, holding her close. She was confused. She had seen her mother fall when she saw this man. But why? Just from surprise? Taya didn't answer her daughter. She couldn't tear her eyes away from Jinho. Now they sat opposite each other on the hallway floor. He in his rain-soaked coat, she in simple house clothes, as if separated by years and an abyss of lies, but suddenly thrown into the same moment in time. No one said a word. The air became thick and heavy. There was horror in Taya's eyes. Pure, silent terror that her entire world, the one she'd so carefully built, was about to collapse. There was guilt, so deep it felt like it was physically pressing on her chest. There was panic. What would she tell her daughter? How would she explain? But most of all, there was a question in her gaze. "Why are you here? How did you find us?" Jinho looked back at her. His face remained a mask of calm, but his eyes were alive and very attentive. There was no anger or reproach in them, for now. There was a cold, analytical understanding. He pieced together the facts in his mind with lightning speed. A girl, Asia. She was about 10 or 11 years old. Her words about her dead father, her resemblance. He peered into the girl's features, clinging to her mother. Yes, there was something of him in her. The shape of her eyebrows, the shape of her eyes. Ty's disappearance many years ago, his fruitless search, her complete silence. All the puzzle pieces fell into place with a quiet, soundless click. He didn't ask, "Is this my daughter?" He already knew the answer. He saw it in Taya's panicked gaze, in her attempt to pull away, in the trembling that ran through her. He simply looked at her, letting her know that he saw. He saw everything, the truth she had hidden for so long. Asia, still hugging her mother, looked from one to the other. She felt her mother's body tense. She saw how silent they were, yet they seemed to be shouting at each other wordlessly. The silence was becoming unbearable. "Mom," she began again, but her voice was quieter now, filled not with understanding, but with nascent fear. You know him? Eiji's question hung in the air, sharp and awkward. Taya flinched as if she'd been struck. She finally tore her gaze away from Jinho and looked at her daughter. In Eiji's eyes, she saw more than just childish curiosity. There was already an understanding there. This man wasn't just a random passerby, and her mother knew him. Shame washed over Taya like a wave. It was searing and nauseating. She'd lied to her own daughter every day for 11 years. She'd stolen Eiji's father, and this man's daughter. And now the lie had been revealed in the most humiliating way. She felt small, dirty, and caught red-handed. The fear was even stronger. Fear of losing their daughter. Fear of her hatred. Fear that everything would collapse. Their quiet life. Their trust. Everything they had. Tai's voice broke, turning into a croak. She tried to stand up, leaning against the wall. Jinho automatically extended his hand to help, but she recoiled again, as if from hot metal. I'm sorry, I didn't. She couldn't collect her thoughts. Her mind was racing, searching for some kind of support in this nightmare. Suddenly, her gaze fell on the kitchen door, on the clean tablecloth on the table. It was a habit, a ritual. In stressful situations, Taya always did something with her hands. Cooked, cleaned, set the table. It gave her the illusion of control. Tea, she breathed, and it sounded like a saving idea. We need tea. We're all soaked. We need to warm up. She practically ran into the small kitchen, leaving Iju and Jinho in the hallway. She clutched at her usual routine like a drowning man clutching at a straw. She took out the kettle, filled it with water, and set it on the stove. She fussily pulled out her best china, the kind she only brought out on special occasions, from the cabinet. She laid out the cups, saucers, and spoons. Her hands trembled, and the spoons clanked against the saucers. Asia and Jinho silently moved into the kitchen. Jinho took off his wet coat and carefully hung it over the back of a chair. He stood and watched her nervous commotion, realizing it was merely a shield, the last barrier before the inevitable conversation. Asia sat at the table, her eyes never leaving her mother. She'd never seen her like this. Even in the most difficult times, her mother was her rock, but now she resembled a frightened bird flapping against the glass. "Mom," Aisha said quietly, "please stop. Sit down." But Taya wasn't listening. She pulled a cookie out of the jar and placed it in a bowl. Her movements were abrupt and pointless. The silence in the kitchen, broken only by the sound of the kettle boiling and the clink of dishes, was finally broken by Jinho. He sat down opposite Eiji, his posture calm and collected. He realized that Taya wouldn't be able to start. Someone had to say the first word, and it would be better if it was him. Calmly, no accusations. "Your daughter," he began, addressing Tai's back, but looking at Aisha, "came up to me on the street. It was raining heavily. She said I looked like her father, the one she thought was dead." Taya froze at the stove, holding the teapot in her hands, her back tensed. Asia nodded, her eyes lighting up. Yes, it was true. She said she had a picture at home, Jinho continued in a calm, almost businesslike tone, and in it, her father was wearing the exact same coat as mine. I offered to give her a ride because it was late and pouring. We got here. She knocked on the door. "You answered." He paused briefly, letting these words sink in. He added nothing of his own. No emotion, no questions, just the facts. Teapot was in her hands. Her face was still pale, but something other than fear, doom, had appeared in her eyes. His voice was quiet, but in the quiet kitchen, it rang like a gong. It wasn't a question. It was the start of a showdown. Jinho's question hung in the air. Taya remained silent, her fingers white on the teapot handle. The answer was obvious to everyone in the room, but saying it out loud would be a confession. Asia spoke. Her voice, usually quiet, sounded clear and demanding. She looked at her mother, and there was no longer fear or confusion in her eyes. There was determination. "Mom," Aisha said, "bring the photograph. The very one, from the box." Taya flinched as if she'd been pushed. Her eyes darted to Jinho, then back to her daughter. "Asia, not now," she began, her voice trembling. "Guess? Tea? Bring it, please," Asia repeated, not looking away. She wasn't going to back down. It all started with this photograph, and now it belonged on the table. The girl felt that only this piece of physical evidence could break through the wall of silence and reticence. "I want to see it. I want to comfort." "Why?" Taya blurted out, her tone akin to a plea. She set the teapot down on the table, nearly spilling the boiling water. "It's just an old card. No need for it now," Asia said firmly. She stood up from the table. "If you don't bring it, I'll find it myself. It's in the nightstand in the bedroom, right? In the blue box." Taya closed her eyes, as if hoping that when she opened them, everything would be gone. But when she looked again, Jinho was sitting at the table, waiting. His face was impassive, but his presence filled the small kitchen, oppressing her, and her daughter stood before her, demanding the truth Taya had so carefully buried all these years. "Please, Mom," Asia said again, and for the first time, Tears appeared in her voice, not from fear, but from despair and an incomprehensible hurt. I have to know. Why does he look like me? Why are you so scared? I'm not a little girl. Bring me a photo. Jinho didn't interfere. He watched. He let the girl lead this conversation. It was both wise and cruel. Taya saw in her daughter's eyes what she feared most, the dawning mistrust, a crack in the absolute trust that had existed between them, and she realized she had lost. If she refused now, that crack would become an abyss. She walked slowly, as if her legs were made of lead, to the bedroom. The minute she spent in the bedroom felt like an eternity. The kitchen was oppressively quiet. Asia sat down, staring at the doorway. Jinho looked at his hands, folded on the table. Finally, Taya returned. In her hands was a small wooden box with inlay. She held it as if it were red hot. She walked over to the table and, without looking at anyone, opened the lid. Inside, on a velvet lining, lay several old photographs and a postcard. She took out one of the photographs. Her hand was visibly shaking. She didn't hand it over right away. She looked at the photo, and her face twisted in pain. It was a moment of farewell. Farewell to the lie that had protected her for so long. Then she placed the photograph on the table, in the middle, between the cups of steaming tea. She didn't push it toward either Ije or Jinho. She simply placed it down and took a step back, as if from a rattlesnake. The black and white photograph, slightly faded with time, captured a young Jinho. He stood in a park, smiling, his eyes closed against the sun. He wore that same long gray coat with large buttons. Taya's hand rested on the sleeve of his coat, young, laughing, with shining eyes. It was a snapshot from another life, from a life Taya had buried. Asia immediately snatched up the photograph. She closely compared the image with the man sitting across from her. Her gaze shifted from the flat photo to the living face. Her own suspicions, her certainty, all of it was nothing compared to this irrefutable proof, now lying there for all to see. Jinho also easy looked at the photograph. He hadn't seen it in years. He'd almost forgotten it existed. Seeing himself like this, young, carefree with Taya, was strange and painful. It was like peering into a parallel universe, where his life had taken a different path. Now the photograph lay on the table, a silent accusation, an undeniable truth, and the silence that followed was louder than any scream. Asia picked up the photograph. She moved it closer to the edge of the table, next to where Jinho sat. Her gaze moved from the paper to his face, again and again. First, the general impression, shoulders, posture, matches, then the details. The shape of the eyebrows, the line of the jaw, the same curve of the lips, even if they were pressed together now and stretched into a smile in the photo. Coat, exactly the same. Same cut, same buttons, same collar. She looked for differences. Any differences? Maybe his nose was different? No. Maybe his ears? No. Maybe a mole above his eyebrow? She looked at the photo, then at his face. The same place, the same small dark spot. Time had added wrinkles around his eyes, a slight sternness to his gaze. But the foundation, the skeleton, were identical, as if the man in the photograph had simply aged 10 years. Asia slowly lowered the photograph onto the table. She no longer looked at it. She looked at Jinho, at a living person. All her doubts, all her hope, and all her fear merged into one firm, icy certainty. "It's you," she said simply, not a question, a statement. Then Asia turned her head and looked at her mother. Taya was leaning against the kitchen cabinet, as if she couldn't stand on her own. Her eyes were full of tears, but she wasn't crying. She looked at her daughter with the expression of someone awaiting a verdict. The air in the kitchen became thick and heavy. Even the kettle stopped hissing. Asia placed her palm on the photograph. "Mom," her voice was quiet, but in this silence, it was like a blow. "Who is he?" She didn't add anything else. There was no need. Her entire world now hinged on the answer to that question. Jinho was looking at Taya too. He wasn't helping her. He was waiting. He was giving her the opportunity to say it herself. It was her right and her duty. Taya opened her mouth, then closed it. She hugged herself, as if to protect herself from the cold. She saw her daughter's gaze change. It no longer held childish trust. It held a demanding, painful search for the truth. "Aisha," she began, and the name sounded like a groan. "Who is he?" the girl repeated, and for the first time there was a firmness in her voice, bordering on harshness. "You know him. I can see that you do. He's in the photograph of my dead dad. So who is he?" The pressure became unbearable. Under the gaze of her daughter and Jinho, the wall of silence Taya had built for years crumbled to dust. She couldn't keep it inside any longer. The truth was bursting out, suffocating her. "He's your father," she breathed. The words came out quietly, a broken, cracked whisper, but they echoed thunderously in the kitchen. Asia froze. She heard the words, but her brain refused to accept them. She stared at her mother, unblinking. Taya continued speaking, hurriedly, confusedly, swallowing back tears. The words flowed like a torrent, as if she were afraid that if she stopped, She would never finish. We were together before you were born. Then we broke up. I was pregnant with you. I was scared. His world. It was different, difficult, dangerous. I didn't want this life for you. I didn't want him to know. I thought I could do it alone. She squeezed her eyelids shut and tears streamed down her cheeks. He tried to find me. He called. He looked for me. I hid. I changed numbers. I moved. Then it became easier to tell you that he was gone, that he was dead. An accident. It was easier that way. For me, I thought I was protecting you. She opened her eyes and looked at Aya with anguish. My whole life, it was a lie to you. Every day. I'm so ashamed, daughter. You can't imagine how ashamed I am. She fell silent, exhausted, devastated. The dirty secret she'd carried for 11 years now lay on the table next to that very photograph. The confession brought no relief, only pain and fear of what would happen next. She looked at her daughter, expecting to see hatred in her eyes. Ty's words hung in the air and died away. Absolute silence reigned in the kitchen. Even the sounds from the street seemed to have vanished. Cups of half-drunk tea sat on the table, the steam slowly fading. Asia didn't move. She sat staring at a single spot on the tabletop, directly in front of the photograph. Her face was smooth and empty, like a mask. Inside, everything was crashing and crumbling. Every word her mother said struck the fragile glass of her world like a hammer. He's your father. I was hiding. I lied. 11 years of lies. 11 years of the story of the fallen hero father she lived by. All her questions, her quiet sadness by the photograph, it all turned out to be built on a deception. The greatest truth of her life turned out to be the greatest lie. Taya looked at her daughter and saw her turn to stone. It was more terrible than screaming or crying. She reached out her hand, but didn't dare touch her. Jinho watched. He saw the shadow of shock and pain pass across the girl's face. He processed the information himself. All the years of searching, all the questions, found their answers here, in this kitchen. It was a chair, screeching as it was pushed away from the table. Asia stood up. Her movements were abrupt, mechanical. She looked at her mother. There were no tears in her eyes, only a cold, mature clarity. I can't forgive this, she said clearly. Her voice sounded alien, flat. You lied to me every day. You took my father away from me. Taya tried to say something, but only a muffled groan came out of her throat. Asia turned to Jinho. She looked at him, studying him, searching his features for what she had seen in the photograph, his father. I want to live with you, she declared. It wasn't a request. It was a decision. I want to know who you are. I want to know the truth. I don't want to be here anymore. The words sounded like a death sentence. Taya grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling. Her worst fear was coming true in the blink of an eye. Jinho rose slowly. He saw the pain in Tai's eyes. He saw his daughter's face, frozen with hurt. There were no winners in this scene, but there was a choice he had to respect. He approached Asia and placed his hand on her shoulder. It was the first conscious, fatherly gesture he'd made in years. His touch was firm and warm. Okay, he said simply. You'll live with me. You'll have your own room. Everything you need. Then he looked at Taya. His face was serious, but without malice. I don't hold a grudge against you, he said, and there was a strange, detached honesty in his words. I understand the fear, but the time for fear is over. He paused, choosing his words. I'll provide her with a good life, the best education, security. You don't have to worry about that. And you, he looked straight at her, you can always visit her, whenever you want, whenever she wants. It wasn't a generous gesture, but a statement of fact. He hadn't intended to steal his daughter entirely, as they had done to him, but he was taking the lead now. He was giving Asia a choice, and letting Taya know that the rules had changed. Asia nodded, agreeing with his words. She didn't look back at her mother. She picked up her photograph from the table and clutched it tightly in her hand. I'll go pack my things, she said, and walked out of the kitchen towards her room. The two adults remained in the kitchen, separated by years of deception and a silent agreement about a future that had only just begun. Jinho picked up his coat. The deed was done. Jinho stands in the doorway of Eiji's small room and watches her pack her things into a duffel bag. She does it quickly, almost furiously, grabbing clothes and books from the shelves without sorting them. Her movements are sharp, angular. She's not crying. She's simply gathering her things, like a soldier about to leave. Taya doesn't enter the room. She stands in the living room, leaning against the wall, staring into space. Her face is wet with tears, but she only lets out quiet, broken sobs. She knows any protest now will be futile. She's burned all bridges with her confession. Asia zips up her bag. She looks around the room. The pink wallpaper, the cartoon posters, the neatly made bed. This is her childhood. She turns and leaves, not looking at her mother. That's it, she says to Jinho, passing by Tai. Asia, Taya whispers, but her daughter doesn't stop. Jinho takes the heavy bag from her hands. Let's go, he says softly. They leave the apartment. Jinho carries the bag. Asia walks alongside, holding only the wooden-framed photograph she'd picked up from the table. She doesn't look back as the door slams shut. The car is waiting at the entrance. The driver, the same one, immediately gets out and opens the door. He casts a quick, professionally dispassionate glance at the girl and her bag, but asks no questions. He takes the bag from Jinho and puts it in the trunk. The ride is completely silent. Asia looks out the window, but this time she sees the streets. They're getting wider, the houses larger and more expensive. They're entering a neighborhood she'd previously only seen on TV or from a bus window. Tall buildings with plate glass windows, well-kept parks behind wrought iron fences. The car stops in front of a nondescript but enormous gray house. It's not a mansion, but more like a fortified modern fortress with a minimum of windows on the ground floor. The gate opens automatically, letting them into the courtyard. Jinho goes out first and helps Aeje. He leads her to the front door, which is opened by a man in simple dark clothes. Not a uniform, but something between a tracksuit and business attire. He nods silently to Jinho. "This is Ilion," Jinho says. Aeje, without explaining who he was, said, "He'll help with anything." Ilion takes the bag and disappears into the depths of the house. Inside, the house is spacious, but almost empty. Lots of open space, minimal furniture. Everything is in neutral tones, gray, beige, black. There are no personal belongings, photographs, or knickknacks. It's clean, expensive, and soulless, like an architect's studio. Jinho leads Iju to the second floor and opens the door to the room. "Here's yours. There's furniture. Clothes, books, whatever you want. We'll buy you tomorrow." The room is large and bright, with a private bathroom and a huge window overlooking the courtyard. It contains a bed, a desk, and an empty closet. Everything is new and still smells of wood and fabric. This is a guest room, quickly prepared for a permanent resident. Asia places the photograph on the bedside table. "Thank you," she says automatically. "Get some rest," Jinho says. "Dinner's in an hour. If you need anything, tell Ilion." He leaves, leaving her alone. Asia sits down on the bed. She looks at the bare walls, at her bag in the middle of the vast room. The numbness begins to recede, and a new reality slowly takes its place. She is in her father's house, a father she doesn't know, a father whose existence she was lied to about. She doesn't feel pain now. She feels empty and very quiet inside. And in this silence, questions begin to arise. The first and most important one is, why? Ilyonon brings the food, simple but expensive dishes. Jinho eats little and silently. Asia picks at her food with a fork. "Thank you," she says again, not knowing what else to say. Jinho nods. The silence stretches on again. But it's different now. Not shocking, but heavy, uncomfortable. Asia feels like she has to ask him something. Otherwise, why is she here? She puts down her fork. "Why did you break up?" She asks bluntly. Her voice is louder than she expected. Jinho slowly puts down his fork. He looks not at her, but at his plate, collecting his thoughts. "Your mother and we were very different," he begins cautiously. "I was a different person. Young, stupid, busy with my own affairs. I had a complicated business, a dangerous one," Aisha asks immediately. "Import-export," he answers, which is technically true, but not the whole truth. "I spent a lot of time traveling, in negotiations, sometimes in conflicts. Your mother wanted stability, a quiet life. She was right. The life I led wasn't right for her. But you knew I was going to have a baby?" Aisha asks again. "Mom said she was pregnant when you broke up." Jinho closes his eyes for a moment. "No," he says honestly. "I didn't know. She didn't tell me. I only found out she was pregnant when I tried to find her after an argument, but she'd already disappeared. Changed her number, moved. Then I found out that she didn't want to see me, that she was afraid of what I would bring into your lives." "What could you have brought?" Asia insists. She senses he's holding something back. Jinho looks at her, his gaze serious and sad. "Danger, Asia. Worry, constant fear. Your mother didn't want this for you. She wanted you to grow up safe, go to a normal school, have normal friends. In her world, in the world she built for you, there was no place for people like me." "But you're my father," Aisha says, her voice shaking. "You were meant to be in my life. She had no right to make that decision for both of us. She had the right to decide for you," Jinho corrects quietly. "She was your mother. She tried to protect you the way she saw fit. Yes, she made a mistake. She lied, but her motive was fear, not malice." Aya is silent, processing this. The anger at her mother still burns brightly within her, but in her father's words, she hears not justification, but understanding, as if he doesn't judge Taya, even after everything. "Do you still love her?" comes her next question, unexpected even for herself. Jinho leans back in his chair. "It's the most personal question of the evening," he says finally, avoiding the word love. "I respect her strength, her determination. Fear is a bad advisor, but it makes people strong when they protect their children. No, I'm not angry with her, but what she did. It's over between us. Only you remain. Asia looks at her hands. She thinks of her mother, alone in their quiet apartment. The feeling of emptiness returns, but now it has a new note, a vague understanding of the complexity of the adult world. Everything is not as black and white as it seemed an hour ago. What will happen now? She asks. To me? To school? To my friends? You're here now, Jinho says. You'll go to a new school, a good one. You'll make new friends. You'll be safe. And your mom? She'll know where you are. When you're ready to talk to her, you can. Asia says quickly, her voice hardening again. Not now. Okay, Jinho agrees. Not now. He gets up from the table. Tomorrow we'll go buy you everything you need. Now go and rest. It's been a long day. Asia nods and goes to her room. She lies down in the new, unfamiliar bed and stares at the ceiling. Her father's words swirl in her head. Dangerous business. Conflicts. Danger. She remembers the gloomy, fortified house, the silent Ileana, a silent car with tinted windows. Who is her father really? Just a businessman? Or something more? And why, despite all his talk of danger, does she feel strangely safe here in this cold fortress? Because he's strong? Because he's not afraid? She turns on her side and looks at the photograph on the nightstand. A smiling young man in a coat, and her mother, happy and carefree. They seem like people from another planet. What happened? What broke? She doesn't have answers yet. But now that the initial shock has passed, she wants to find them. She wants to understand her father, to understand the truth about why her life turned out the way it did. And the first step will be tomorrow, a new day in a new life that has only just begun. Asia wakes to an unfamiliar silence. In their old apartment, there were always sounds from the street, neighbors, and the elevator. Here, there's complete, profound silence, broken only by the ticking of a clock somewhere in the distance. Sunlight streams through the large window, illuminating the empty walls of her room. Over breakfast, Jinho invites her to go shopping. He says it simply, like a normal father heading to the mall with his daughter. But when they approach the garage, Asia sees not one, but 3 identical dark cars. One has the hood open, and a man is checking something. It's not Ilion, but someone else, dressed in equally simple dark clothes. He nods silently to Jinho and gives Asia a quick, assessing glance, not threatening, but rather analytical, as if examining a new element in an equation. We'll take this one, Jinho says, pointing to the car in the middle. The driver, another stranger, is already behind the wheel. The ride itself is silent. Asia glances out the window. She notices their car isn't going straight. It's making several seemingly unnecessary turns. The driver keeps checking his mirrors. Jinho sits relaxed, scrolling through his phone, but his eyes occasionally flicker to the rearview mirror. It's not paranoia. It's habit, a safety ritual. They are met by a manager in a large, gleaming shopping center, usually reserved and dignified. He becomes almost obsequious upon seeing Jinho. Mr. Lee, we are honored. Everything is ready. A personal escort will be with you. No need, Jinho replies dryly. We're just going for a walk. They stroll through the boutiques. Jinho offers Asia the chance to choose whatever she wants. Clothes, shoes, gadgets. He doesn't look at the prices. He nods, and the sales assistants immediately pack the items he's chosen. His credit card, a plain black card with no markings, appears and disappears in a second. But Asia barely notices the things. She watches the people. 2 men in casual clothes, hanging around nearby, but not looking at the windows. Their gaze glides over the crowd, the exits, the elevators. They're not pretending to be shoppers. They're here for work. Their job is to observe. One day, as they pass an electronics store, a young man in an expensive but flashy suit approaches Jinho. He smiles, but his eyes are nervous. Mr. Lee! What an unexpected meeting. I was just about to... Jinho doesn't even pause. He makes a barely perceptible gesture with his hand. One of the 2 male observers instantly appears between him and the young man. Make an appointment through the secretary, Jinho says without turning around. His voice is icy. The young man freezes, his mouth open, and then quickly disappears into the crowd. Asia sees all this out of the corner of her eye. She doesn't ask anything, but the puzzle is starting to come together. That evening, when they return with dozens of packages, another incident occurs. Jinho escorts Iju to her room and tells her he needs to make a few calls. He goes into his office, a room on the ground floor with a heavy oak door. Asia sits in her room, but curiosity is consuming her. She quietly leaves and descends the stairs. The door to the office is ajar. Voices can be heard from inside, not just Jinho's. Someone else is talking, excitedly and rapidly. Asia freezes around the corner of the hallway, out of sight from the office. This can't go on like this, boss. He doesn't respect borders. He thinks that because he has people now, he can encroach on our territory, says a hoarse male voice. And what is he proposing? Jinho's voice is calm, Proposing! He's demanding a percentage of the southern supplies. He says he's protecting the logistics. That's insolent. Protecting? Jinho's voice becomes quieter, but that only makes it more dangerous. On my logistics? There's a pause. Asia barely breathes. Jinho finally says. His voice sounds tired, but there's no weakness in it. Let him come and say it to my face. And in the meantime, find out where he got these people from, who gave them to him, and where they are now. Carefully. Understood, boss. There's the sound of a chair being pushed back. Asia bounces off the wall and runs silently back up the stairs, her heart pounding in her throat. She dashes into her room and closes the door, leaning her back against it. Boss, territory, supplies, protection. These were words from cop shows, from the crime newsreels that my mother quickly flicked through. They sounded abstract and distant. Now they resonated in her father's voice. The next day, she makes up her mind. At lunch, she puts down her fork. Dad, she says for the first time, and the word feels strange on her tongue. What do you do? Really? Jinho slowly puts down his napkin. He looks at her. He doesn't look surprised. It seems he'd been expecting this question. I have a business. Different ones. What business? Asia insists. Yesterday, I overheard a conversation about territory, about some people. He doesn't ask how or what she heard. He nods. I have companies. They transport goods, own real estate, run restaurants. Everything is legal. Everyone pays taxes. But the world, Asia, is complicated. Sometimes businesses have competitors. Sometimes these competitors don't play by the rules, not by the law. You can't just call the police, because their methods are different. That's why you need to be able to negotiate, or show that negotiating is more profitable than feuding. Are you Mafia? Asia blurts out, and her own words frighten her. Jinho doesn't wince. He's not angry. There is such a word. It's harsh and imprecise. I am a person who ensures order in my world. I provide work. I ensure the safety of those who work with me. I solve problems that the law can't or won't solve. Sometimes it requires force. More often, just talking. That's how the world works. Not black and white. Many shades of gray. But it's dangerous. Aisha whispers. Mom was right. Yes, he agrees honestly. It is dangerous. That's why I didn't look for you aggressively. I knew roughly where you lived, with whom. I could have taken you by force many years ago. But I didn't want to bring this danger into your world until you yourself came to me in the rain. Asia is silent. Her image of her mafia father, conjured up from movies, collides with reality. This man doesn't shout or brag. He's calm. He reads the newspaper in the morning. He asks how she liked the omelet. And yet, with a single phone call, he can decide someone's fate. He lives in a fortress because he has enemies. Are you someone? She can't finish. I protect what's mine, he replies, avoiding a direct answer, but his gaze hardens. I protect my people, my family, and now you. It takes more than just money, Iya. It takes respect, and sometimes fear. Without fear, respect quickly disappears. Later that evening, Ilian brings her a laptop and phone. He sets them on the table. Father told you what you need. There's a shortcut on the phone, a red button on the side. Press it, and you can call him or me right away. Always. Even if the screen is locked, carry it with you at all times. Asia picks up the phone. It's heavier than it looks. There really is a barely visible red button on the side, under a rubber flap. It's not a toy. It's a safety device. She goes to bed, but sleep won't come. She thinks about her father, about his quiet strength, about his dangerous world, into which she has now been immersed. Her mother feared this world and hid her from it. But now, once inside, Asia doesn't feel the all-consuming fear she expected. She feels anxiety, curiosity, and a strange, incomprehensible sense of security. Her father is a storm, but he stands between it and her. He is a wall. She stands and goes to the window. In the courtyard, under the soft light of the street lamps, she sees Ilion's figure. He's not just standing there. He's making a slow, methodical patrol of the grounds. He's not a uniformed guard. He's a soldier. Her soldier, on her father's orders. Asia returns to bed. She no longer has easy answers. There's a father who loves her, but whose love exists in a world of shadows and silent threats. There's a mother who lied, but out of love and fear. And then there's herself, a girl on the border between two worlds, who must now decide how to live with a truth that turns out to be far more complex than a lie. Half a year has passed. Asia's life. She attended a prestigious private school, where she adapted surprisingly quickly, not because of the money, but because of her innate intelligence and the inner resilience born of the upheavals she had endured. She made new friends, but she told none of them about her family, her address, her father a businessman who was often on the road, a standard set for the area. Jinho kept every promise. She had not just a room, but an entire wing of the house, furnished to her taste, books, music, even a small telescope by the window. He didn't become an intrusive father, but he was there. They ate dinner together. When he was in town, he asked about school, about her thoughts, listening attentively. Sometimes they simply read silently in the same room. It was a tender, careful connection, growing day by day. He never again spoke to her directly about his work, but she learned to read the signs. A tense call late at night, and the next morning, Ilian was especially vigilant, with a second car following behind. Brief, businesslike visits by stern men to the office, leaving the house smelling of expensive coffee, and a subtle, barely perceptible tension. She saw how he was simultaneously respected and feared, and she understood the main thing. His strength lay not in shouting and threats, but in icy calm and absolute predictability. His word was law. His revenge was mathematically precise. His defense was impenetrable. One day, returning from school, she saw a tearful woman standing at their gate, trying to explain something to Ilian. Asia recognized her as the wife of the insolent young man from the shopping center. An hour later, Jinho, without raising his voice, said just one sentence on the phone. "Your wife begged at my gate. Next time, she'll beg at the hospital." Understood? The woman was never seen at their house again. Asia realized she lived within a source of power, dark but real, and this power now protected her too. But in the silence of her room, she thought about her mother. The initial anger and resentment subsided, leaving behind a complex sadness. She saw messages from Taya. At first, desperate, full of apologies, then simply asking, "How are you? How was school? Have you eaten?" Asia didn't answer, but she didn't block the number either. The turning point came on a cold January evening. Jinho had flown away for a few days on business. The house, already quiet, was plunged into complete silence. Asia sat poring over her textbooks, her thoughts elsewhere. She picked up that very photograph, happy faces, her mother's smile, which she hadn't seen in years, and she realized she wasn't missing the false life they'd built for her. She missed her mother, her laughter, her scent, lingering on the old clothes in the closet, her anxious, suffocating, but true love. She picked up the phone and dialed the number. "Hello?" Ty's voice sounded instantaneous, halting, and full of hope. "Mom, it's me." There was silence on the other end, and then quiet sobs. "Asia, my sunshine, forgive me." "Not now, Mom," Asia interrupted, her voice softer than she'd intended. "No apologies now. I want to see you." Jinho arranged the meeting, or rather, he agreed to it when Asia asked. He didn't ask any unnecessary questions, simply nodded. "Tell Ilian when and where. He'll ensure safety." He didn't offer neutral territory or his presence. He entrusted that to her. They met in a small, cozy cafe in the city center, far from their old neighborhood and the new Iji fortress. Ilian sat at a table near the exit, engrossed in a newspaper. Unremarkable. Taya arrived first. She looked 10 years older. But when she saw her daughter enter the cafe, her face lit up with such a pure, unbridled light that it took Asia's breath away. It was awkward at first. Hugs, tears, silence. Then the conversation. Timid and cautious. Taya talked about work, about her neighbor. She didn't ask about Jinho. Asia talked about school, about astronomy, which she'd become interested in. She didn't talk about security, about the late-night calls, about the life lessons she was learning. Asia said suddenly, looking into her cup of cocoa, "Not completely. I'm still hurt. And upset." Taya nodded, barely holding back new tears. "I know. I'm not waiting. I'm glad to see you. I missed you every day." "But Dad, he's a good father," Aya said quietly, calling him that for the first time in her mother's presence. "He's not like you thought. He's complicated, but he loves me and protects me in his own way." Taya took a deep breath. "I saw the way he looked at you then, on the threshold, and I realized I was wrong. Not about his danger, but about the decision I made for both of you. I had no right to deprive you of your father, and him of his daughter." They were silent. "I'm not coming back to live with you, Mom," Asia said clearly. "My life is there now. I have responsibilities, and I want to get to know him, but I want you in my life, in a way that's right for us." Taya wiped away her tears and smiled weakly. It was a smile full of sadness and acceptance. "For me, the right thing is just to know that you're happy, and to see you sometimes, if you let me." "I'll allow it." Asia nodded. When they left the cafe, the same fine, cold rain was drizzling outside as the day they first met Jinho. But now, Asia wasn't the same helpless girl under the awning. She was different. Jinho's car pulled smoothly up to the curb. Asia hugged her mother goodbye, tightly, like a grown-up. "I'll call," she promised. As she got into the car, she saw Taya standing in the rain, watching her go, not with despair, but with a quiet, bitter hope. In the car, Asia silently looked out the window. "Is everything okay?" Ilian asked, meeting her gaze in the mirror. "Yes," Asia answered. "Everything is as it should be." Jinho was waiting for her at home. He had returned earlier. He was standing by the fireplace in the living room, without turning on the light, watching the flames. "How was the meeting?" he asked without turning around. "It's hard, but it's good." Asia said, coming over and standing next to her. She looked at the fire. Thank you for letting go. She's your mother, he said simply. You have a right to her, and she has a right to you. Within the boundaries you set, he placed his hand on her shoulder, a gesture of acceptance and respect for her choice. Asia realized her story hadn't ended that rainy evening. It had simply begun. She no longer had one simple truth. There was a complex, multifaceted reality. There was a mother broken by fear and love. There was a father whose love was a fortress of steel and silence. And there was herself, a bridge between the two shores of her life. She was no longer just a girl. She was Asia, the daughter of Taya and Jinho. And her future was not predetermined by the past, but was built by herself, step by step, under the cold autumn rain, which no longer frightened her.